Well, welcome everybody. This is something different for all of us, something different for me for sure. I'm used to teaching in person. This will be probably my second or third recorded teaching ever. But I want to welcome those who are a part of Care Night, those that are members of Celebrate Recovery, and maybe those from the church and the community that have never tuned in before. We're going to be talking today about Step 1. Step 1 deals with concepts like powerlessness and surrender. This time being in the pandemic and everything that we're going through, it seems like proper timing to be talking about these concepts and these words. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down Step 1, word by word, kind of the concept, how we apply it to our lives, how God works in us and through us through this step. And then we're going to make that available to you. So it's exciting for us to be able to do this. So Step 1, I'm going to step out of the way here. Step 1 says we admitted we were powerless over, and you'll see here that I've left this blank. For those of you who are familiar with recovery, you might put the word addiction in here. You might put a specific chemical like alcohol or cocaine. For Celebrate Recovery purposes, they often say hurt, habit, or hang up, but we could say we're powerless over COVID-19. We're powerless over the situation we're in and having to stay 6 feet away from everybody. We're powerless over having to stay home from our jobs and what that looks like, and even maybe powerless over our own incomes and finding the things we need in the community. So whatever you need to plug into that spot, that's what you put in there. So let me say that again. We admitted we were powerless over our struggles, that our lives had become unmanageable. And the first word in this step is we, often the most important word in the step. What this means is that we're not going through this alone, that other people have gone through this, maybe going through this with us, that other people have been down this road before us. I wouldn't have found my own recovery if someone hadn't shared that with me, and so that's that power of we. You know, our scripture tells us that when two or more are gathered, that God's present. And so when we are in recovery together, when we do this as a community, God's with us in this. The second word is admitted. Admitted is kind of an easy thing, right? Most of us have said at some point or confessed at some point, I have this problem or this sin or this addiction, or I've struggled with this issue. When you think about the word admitted in this context, it's deeper than that. It's talking about letting in. That we're letting in the truth of our condition. We're letting in the truth, maybe in regards to what we spoke of earlier in the current pandemic, that what I'm really admitting is that as much as I'd like to be in control of my life and my destiny, my income, that maybe I'm really not, that I'm letting the full knowledge, the full truth of my condition into my innermost self, that I really am taking in what that means. When we struggle with addiction, when we struggle with things like alcohol and drugs, when we say that we're admitting, it means that I'm taking in everything that means. It means that that has a physical, mental, and emotional impact on my life. It means that I'm probably going to get worse, never better, without divine intervention. It means that I need help and I need to do something about it. So this word admitted is a powerful, powerful word in regards to recovery. So we know we're not alone. We know that we have to have this really deep, intimate knowledge and knowing of what my issue is and everything that comes with it. And then here we go again, that we together, all of us, have experienced powerlessness. Powerlessness. And simply put, powerlessness means being without power. That our dilemma here is that I cannot, of my own strength, of my own will, figuratively pull myself up by my bootstraps. That I can't beat this thing on my own limited resources. And what they talk about a lot in some of the 12-step programs that are out there is that God is the only one who really has power. That God is power. So when we say powerless, we really mean that I have no power, that I'm without power. And so our dilemma is finding that power, and we're going to talk about that more when we get into steps like 2 and 3. But I really just want you to focus now on that idea that by myself, of my own resources, I can't beat whatever this thing is. If I'm an alcoholic, I know I'm an alcoholic because I can't quit drinking on my own. I've tried to limit, I've tried to slow down, I've tried to stop, I've tried to move, all these things that we do, get a different job, maybe relationships have ended over it. And no matter what happens, I still find that I can't quit. That's that sense of powerlessness. And I'm powerless over, again, my hurt, habit, or hang up, my issue, my sin, my mental struggles, the way I think. You know, we're to take every thought captive as Christians. And sometimes that's easier said than done. What is that way of thinking? Maybe it's negative, maybe it's judgmentalism, maybe it's sexual thoughts that I don't want to have, those things. So it can be anything in here that we're struggling with, and that our lives had become unmanageable. One of the really important things I was taught is that this hyphen in this step is extremely important. It's something that we often overlook. We simply pause at this point. But what that really means is it creates two independent clauses. And so I'm going to tackle this on its own and then come back and tie these two things together. That our lives had become unmanageable. And it doesn't say if or maybe. It says that our lives had become unmanageable, that this is a fact. This is a fact for us. And we'll talk a little bit more about this word in a moment. That our lives. So what does it mean to say our lives? Why plural? Well, part of the reason it's plural is the whole step is written that way. We talked before about we. But another way to think of this word lives is that we all have hats that we wear. We're a mom, we're a dad, we're a husband and wife, we're a worker, we're a friend, we're a daughter. All those different aspects of our life, all those ways that we go through life. And we often are different, whether we like to admit it or not, in those different aspects of our life. What happens once we become powerless, whatever this thing is, it begins to weave its way into every aspect of our life. It begins to weave its way into every hat that I wear, every relationship that I have, in my job. Eventually we can't hide this anymore, and it begins to permeate all that we do. So we're not just powerless at home, we're not just powerless at work, I'm not just powerless when I'm out drinking with my friends, but I'm powerless and unmanageable everywhere in every aspect of my life. And that we had become unmanageable over time. And that time might be short, that time might be quickly, but over time we become unmanageable. Unmanageability has been defined a lot of different ways, and oftentimes when I have a live audience, I'll even ask people to define unmanageability, and often you find, well, I couldn't pay my bills, or I couldn't hold on to a relationship, or I was always depressed. But unmanageability really means the inability to live life on life's terms. And what does that mean? Well, to live life on life's terms means I could not handle life as it came to me. In other words, I had to find some way to escape, some way to deal with life, some way that at first felt like a solution in my life. Oftentimes, those who started drinking will tell you that they either started drinking to have fun, to fit in. They may have discovered early on that drinking helped them to relax, to be able to be themselves at a party or to interact with people. No one started drinking hoping that one day they'd be getting DUIs and not being able to go to work. No one starts those things for that reason. Even when we're kids, right? We often tell our first lie as pretty young children. Well, why do we do that? Well, we often lie because we want to stay out of trouble. We want to keep ourselves from punishment. So initially, this thing seems like a good thing in our lives, that whatever our coping mechanism is, whatever this hurt, habit, or hang-up is, it often started as a way to cope with things. But very quickly, it becomes the problem. And so we have this inability to live life as life is coming to me. Instead of telling the truth, instead of meeting life without drinking, I have to do these things to cope with life. So this inability to live life on life's terms. Go back to that point I was making where someone will often say, well, I couldn't pay my bills, or I ended up homeless, or I destroyed a relationship. Well, that's not everybody's story. In fact, a lot of you watching this may not have had any of those terrible things happen, and I hope you haven't. But we still can have unmanageability. And what someone once told me is unmanageability lives in our head, that the place where unmanageability really exists is in my thinking. and in my inability or unwillingness to adapt to life. And so I find these things to help me, these crutches. And again, we could put the word sin in here. We could put struggles, habits, whatever that is. All those things typically come out of this idea of unmanageability. And I told you we would come back to this hyphen. And the reason I want to come back to this is these are two independent clauses. But the other thing that this does is it makes this step reflexive. And what that means is it doesn't necessarily have to go in this order. We could have said our lives had become unmanageable, that we admitted we were powerless. And what I often show people is, let's again, for a simple illustration, use drinking as our example. If you're an alcoholic and you drink, you started out drinking, let's say, to not be angry. That when you drank, you were relaxed, you weren't mad, you were able to have a good time, and so you drank. And eventually, drinking became the problem. But when you have unmanageability, you try to chase that again. And so what happens is, I drink, I'm powerless, I have unmanageability in my life, so I drink more and I'm powerless and I have unmanageability in my life. And what happens is we have this struggle that creates the addiction cycle. So whether it was unmanageability that caused me to drink and then I became powerless, which caused me more unmanageability, or I drank because I was curious and then eventually I was powerless over it and it caused me unmanageability, eventually that just becomes a using cycle that I get caught in over and over and over again. And so we'll talk about a couple words and then I want to really tie this in to how we apply this to our life and how God can help us move on from here. So one of the words I want to address is this word denial. And we kind of talked about it when we talked about this term of admitted. But denial really means that I am denying the truth about my life and about the problems I have and about the struggles I'm having. Denial is not the same as delusion. A lot of people describe delusion when they're talking about denial. Delusion is I believe the lies I'm telling, that I'm really not in reality and I'm believing something that is not true. Denial means I know the truth, but I'm simply pretending the best I can that it's not the truth. That's where most people find themselves. Most people are not delusional. Most people are in denial, which means that I really don't want to believe that this thing that I really know at my heart is true, I don't want to believe it's true. And so that's why we have to admit. That's why we have to have that sort of, that soul recognition, I'll call it, that deep recognition that I do indeed have this problem, I am struggling in this area. And the other word we want to talk about is this word surrender. Surrender sounds like a bad word to most of us, especially in Western culture. We don't want to surrender. We don't want to admit that we have a problem. But in this case, we're surrendering to win. I'm going to use a really nerdy, what I think is a nerdy example, but something that worked really well for me. And it's a Star Wars example. And in Star Wars, in the very first one that ever came out on a movie called A New Hope, you have the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And Obi-Wan Kenobi is in a battle with Darth Vader, and they're having this saber duel. And whether you've seen Star Wars or not doesn't matter. You can get something from this illustration. But the two of them are fighting, and Darth Vader is basically telling Obi-Wan that last time we met, you were the master, you were better, but now I'm better, and I'm going to end your life. And Obi-Wan Kenobi makes this comment that confuses Darth Vader and the whole audience at that point. And he says, if you strike me down, in other words, if you kill me now, Darth Vader, I'm going to be more powerful than you ever could have imagined. And Darth Vader sort of blows him off. And he takes this one last swing, and as he swings, we see Obi-Wan Kenobi disappear. We see him go away. And all of a sudden, one of the main characters, Luke, hears the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi in his ear telling him to run and to go. What Obi-Wan Kenobi was trying to illustrate and was trying to tell Darth Vader was that as an old man fighting, he had the strength of an old man. He had the speed of an old man. He had the intelligence and wit of an old man, of a finite person, only himself, only what he could offer. And in that, he was able to be defeated by Darth Vader. But when he surrendered, when he gave himself to the Force, he became one with the power of the universe. He now had the ability to be in many places at one time, to talk to Luke in his head as a spirit, to continue to instruct and go wherever Luke wanted to go. When we surrender in the program, when we say, I admit I'm powerless, I have this problem, I have this issue, and of my own power, I can't do this. God, will you help me? We now have the creator of the universe working with us on our behalf to help us to beat this thing. So imagine the difference between your limited resources and your limited power and the power of Jesus Christ. And that's really the difference. And that's why that word and that concept of surrender is so important when we talk about step one. As I said before, when we get into the later steps, we'll really look at what does that look like to let God continue to lead our lives and to instruct us in recovery. And the last thing I want to do is just kind of give you a couple practical questions, and we will try to send these out to you either in a later email or connected with this video. But one of those things is how often did you do this thing? Whatever this thing is, whether it's taking a drink, a way of thinking, a sinful behavior, whatever it is, how often did you do that? Were you doing that several times a day? What was your pattern? And how did that change over time? Did it start out where maybe it only was occasionally, maybe you only drank with friends or with your spouse, and now you find that you're hiding it and you're drinking every day? Or you were lying only a little bit, but now you're lying to cover up lies and you don't even know why you're telling the lie that you're telling today, but you're doing it all the time? And the second question is very similar to the first. How much were you doing this? What was the scope of that? So let's take the lying again. Not only am I lying all the time, but my lies are getting bigger and bigger. They're getting deeper and deeper. They're getting more complicated. And how did that change over time? If you're drinking, if we're talking about drinking, you started out a 6-pack would get you drunk. Now you got to drink 12, 24, whatever it is. Or maybe you went from beer to hard liquor so that you could still get that same effect. And looking at how that has progressed over time. Question 3 is, what were you trying to achieve? Maybe in the beginning you weren't trying to achieve anything. You were having fun, you were being a part of, but now you drink to pass out. Or maybe now you lie because you don't want to be discovered a liar, and you've got to have this intricate web of lies to cover up everything that's come before for fear of how people will feel about you or see you. Number 4 would be, what can you do? What can you personally do to try to get out of this? Have you ever tried to quit or slow down on your own? And what were the results? How did that work? Now I'm gonna bet that you're watching this video partly because that didn't work out very well. That you might have gotten better, it might have slowed, it might have stopped for a time, but you found yourself eventually back there again. And the final question is, do you sort of see how the program and God working through concepts like this can help you? Do you trust that God is going to work on your behalf? And that kind of starts to float into that step 2. So I don't want to go any further than that. But like I said, we'll send some steps out, some written questions that will help you. I'm going to back up again just for a second, let you look at the board. You can zoom in on that. If you have any questions, you can respond to our email or call the church, ask for myself. I should have introduced myself when the video started. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom Gilbert. I'm the care pastor here at Northside Christian Church. But it has been an honor to do this video, to do this teaching. Like I said, I haven't done much of this, but in the wake of everything that's happened, we were glad to bring this to you. So hope this is helpful. Take care.